Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next Conversation with Science session. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Erica McAllister, Senior Curator at the Natural History Museum, to the stage. She is slightly obsessed with flies. I caught her backstage staring at the flies in the green room, and she's got a lot of interesting things to talk to you about now. We are going to do audience Q&A after 15 minutes, so please do prepare your questions. Welcome, Erica.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So I'm very, very lucky. I get to work at the Natural History Museum in London, and this is an extraordinary place to work. As already highlighted, I'm quite an obsessive personality, and it is very lucky that I can work behind the scenes of what is a very obsessive collection. This is an extraordinary collection looking at the biological heritage of our planet, saving it, caring for it, nurturing it, and growing it. Because behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum, we have 80 million specimens. On display, we have about 1%. But I am very lucky that I work on the best animals on the planet, because I work on flies. Now, I know you're all here because you love biodiversity and you're very careful about biodiversity, but I have come to this realization that not many people like flies. Which is a little unfair, because flies are arguably the most amazing creatures on the planet, and what I want to tell you about today is some of the reasons why you want to look after them, and some of the things and ways that we're going about trying to do this ourselves. Now, these are flies. Some of them are from my garden, because that's quite exciting. These are you obviously know what I'm talking about here. I can do a little count and you can tell me which species these are? No. So this is a beautiful hoverfly. If anyone does like flies, it's always the hoverflies. They look like bees, so we might as well like them like bees. And this may be good because actually they're very important in many of the same ways that bees are, just a little bit better. So you've got all this amazing variety of form. Look at this one here. Its first pair of legs have basically got ribbons. So this is a male fly. It's always the males that are weird. This is a male fly that has modified his front legs to dance for the ladies. This is in your garden. Here, we have another male fly that's basically got a feather duster on its bottom. Again, this is to attract the ladies. In fact, any animal that grows antlers out of its cheeks is worth looking at. So flies are incredibly morphologically plastic. They're very variable. And this has enabled them to probably get into more environments than most other species on the planet. They are the first to turn up at the ecological party, and often, like me, they're very much the last to leave it. So flies, they get their little tarsi, they get their little feet into absolutely everything. They are predators, they are parasites, they're parasitoids. My favorite is the one that lives off the nose of a camel. What an exciting habitat that is. You get herbivores, you get sanguivores, fungivores, decomposers, and pollinators. And if I can't convince you to like a fly, I would tell you that you wouldn't have chocolate without them, because they are the pollinators of chocolate. You like a cup of tea? They are very good pollinators of tea. Do you like your mangoes? In fact, a fly 5,000 years ago falling into some milk converted that milk into cheese. So tea, chocolate, cheese, mangoes, you name it, they're very important pollinators. And this is one of the reasons that we have got to start thinking about a lot of the smaller neglected species going out there. Now, I'm very lucky. I'm very, very much involved with biodiversity. I get to travel all around the world. You name it, flies get there. It's very handy for me. And I've been to exciting places. Look, here am I, hoovering a pig in Hounslow Farm. That wasn't the most exciting field work, but I am getting everywhere. And as someone who was very, very much involved early on in ecology, I really wanted to know what was going on. And I realized we couldn't know much about ecology until we started describing it, so we really knew what was there. How can we conserve an area if you can't tell me how many species are in it? Why is it? What's going on with change? And the thing about flies, about insects, is that we really don't know anything. The UK is arguably the most described country on the planet. And did you know there's more flies here than there are mammals in the world? So there's 6,500 species of mammal. There's over 7,000 species of fly in the UK. Now, we have studied the UK for a very long time. The rest of the world, we know nothing. But we know nothing about the soil. We don't know anything about the fly larvae that live there. The trees, we don't know what's going up there. There's so much more we want to know. So I'm very lucky. Thank you, taxpayers. I spend quite a lot of time in the Caribbean. It's very nice. It's like this, but a little bit more rum. And I am working on describing these new species. So this is, for example, houseflies, okay? I've just described with my colleague 20 new species of housefly. Surely there can't be that many houseflies. There's thousands of them. And this is great. And there's a group we're working on next called punk flies, which I have to admit, I'm just doing it because of the name. But we're working on this. And it's really important when we go out and do that, that we just don't hide these specimens. We work with the community. We work with all sorts of people, encouraging them. And I'm very much involved with outreach. I want you to know about flies. I want you to know why we're collecting them, why we're studying them. So I take a lot of students. Not all of them like it as much as I do. I know, she really didn't like it. There's no getting around that. But thankfully, we do work alongside a lot of people who really want to help us. And this has led to some extraordinary initiatives coming out of the museum. And one of my favourite at the moment is the Darwin Tree of Life project. So this is a great project. We are ambitiously trying to record the genomes, sequence the genomes of 70,000 species of eukaryotic organisms in the UK. Now, this involves me running around the countryside with a hoover, literally cleaning it up. I have a sweep net, but also involves everyone, all the members of public, helping us, collaborating with us. They are part of our environment, and they contribute to our collections. Our collections were built on everyone helping, donating, giving. And that's the thing about the collections. It's not just going out there and describing that. The specimens don't just come back to the museum and get locked up and hidden away. Well, mine do, because I don't want you touching them. But we actually enable you to come in and research them. But to get this information, 80 million specimens out there, we're going to have to start properly recording them, collating them, getting that information out there. So we're databasing them. This is a long and tedious and slow process, but it's absolutely fundamental, and we can start to use this data for very important things, such as climate change. So this is the hoverflies. So this is the one group of flies that everyone goes, they're quite nice, we like those. And it's like, yes. And we have been recording hoverflies for nearly 50 years, observations. But our data in our collections goes back a lot further than that. We have at least 150 years worth of data. And we are starting now to look at what's going on. So this is a species, Volocella. It's the big hornet hoverfly. It's the one that everyone panics about. It's absolutely beautiful and harmless, much like me. No. And what it did, it turned up in 1907, and we've been monitoring ever since, and we can see its population shifting. Now, this is really handy, because we can see with climate change, populations shifting off the top. Now, when they produced the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystems Function, I spent the day in bed listening to this completely. And one of the take-home messages I got was that there was no insects in the report. Now, insects make up 85% of the biota of this planet, and yet they weren't in this report because we don't have the data. We've been working on the mammals, we've been working on all the other vertebrates, but they're really important, the ecosystem functioners, these are the building blocks of our ecosystems we don't know enough about. So it's fundamental we get this data out there. But there are many other ways we can start using the collections now. And technology is absolutely brilliant at the moment. It's like everything's coming together to help us. And it does involve washing quite a bit, which is quite amusing. So this, obviously, you all know, is a flesh fly. Yep. These are the big ones that hang around your garden, lovely big feet. look really cute. And their name is slightly unappealing, sarcophagids. But what we've been able to do is wash them in a certain way to look at the chemicals, to look at the hydrocarbons on their exoskeletons to help us speciate. Now, this is important, and we have to thank once more a very, very small but important fly, the Drosophila, for helping us understand us, our relationships, our inheritance, and how we can look and monitor things now. Because what we did with this fly, with the Drosophila, we were able to measure the chemicals on its exoskeleton and realize that chemicals changed with sex, with age, and with species. Now, this is interesting because then I can now go out in the environment, catch a fly, swab it, and I can tell you what it is, how old it is, and relates to. Now, this is quite interesting because we really don't know much about lifespan. We don't know how to sex most species. Female sarcophagids, for example, you can't identify. So we are losing a whole lot of our understanding about biodiversity because of it. But now, we've realized how we can do this. And what we've done, what is really important with our collections, is that we've gone back in time and we've swabbed them. So now, not only are we able to tell you what species they are, but how old they are. And this gives you so much more information about the environment they're in. My favorite work recently was when I became a glorified hairdresser, and we started washing and blow drying mosquitoes. Now, this wasn't just for fun, nope, and it wasn't just so we could do really good doodles when it came to it. It was because we were looking at the DNA. Now, we know a lot about barcoding, it's very easy. We also know a lot about whole genome sequencing when it comes to recent material. The Darwin Tree of Life is doing that. But DNA fragments. So the mosquitoes in our collection, they're very much fragmented. So how useful really are they to us? Well, genius people, not me, people who understand, have realized that there's a way of actually repairing this to actually have a look at what's going on. So we took these old mosquitoes, we washed them, we extracted this DNA, and because I'm a collections manager, if you damage any of my specimens, I will damage you. So what we had to do was try and make sure it was done in a way that we could keep these specimens, keep them in the best way morphologically to enable us to look at them afterwards. So we washed them, we blow-dried them, and then we analyzed them. We called it Neandersquito, a project. And what we were able to do, we have now been able to restore the DNA from our mosquitoes from the 1900s. Now, this is really cool. I have just reread The Silent Spring again and cried once more again. But when they were talking about when the eradication program with mosquitoes came out and how within a few years the resistance was built into the genome, you can see that in our collection. You can see the mosquitoes before and after. Now, I don't want to tell you about things destroying insects, but this technology now can be really useful in helping us look at climate change and how things speciate. We can go back through our collections and we can start asking much more from these dead specimens. We are just one museum. We're an amazing museum, I'm not going to lie, but we are just one museum. This is a data point of all the other natural history museum collections in the UK. You think about our collection, 80 million specimens there. Think about all of these, and suddenly you realize you're using a massive data set. And this is really important. Because I know people often think a dead fly is the best fly, but it isn't. Because this is now, we need to convince people that flies offer a lot more, they're ecologically much more important. But also, when they come to the collection, these dead specimens, these dead creatures, are very much important for the preservation of the living ones. So when you think about research, when you think about understanding, think about museums as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Wonderful, can't wait to come see the collection myself. Now we're going to take some questions from the audience, if anyone has one. If you want to raise your hand. One over here.
Hey, I'm Henry. I'm from the Ocean Plastics Leadership Network. I was wondering, I read Edward O. Wilson's book recently on insects, and he talked about preserving the biodiversity and thought maybe we should open up half the earth, right, and have that just dedicated to biodiversity. I wanted to know what you think about it on your side.
Well, I was at the conference 2 weeks ago when he talked about this, so preserving half the earth. Now, the thing about insects is that, yes, we have to be very careful. I think we should preserve everything. I mean, but don't, professionally, I can't say that. But there's also a lot more resilience with a lot of the insect populations than we give credit to. But what I'm scared about with all of this is our lack of understanding about them. So I don't want to say yes, no. I don't want to go in and say we can get rid of this and we can save that. Because actually, we still have so much to know. I mean, the whole thing with reading The Silent Spring again is like, what was really amazing is that we've just changed the names, but we're doing exactly the same thing. But nature itself is very resilient. The hoverflies, for example, there's a group that migrate from North Africa into the UK. So we don't think of flies migrating, but these do. Now, why these are so good is because they're such high up in the aerial plankton, they can look down and they can see relic plant populations. So as long as we have pockets that they can get to, they're really useful at transferring the genomes, transferring the pollen of these things, so they can survive. So whether we need half, that would be lovely. We need more than we got at the moment. And we need to convert a lot of the agricultural land into a much more functional ecosystem. Silenced.
Any other questions?
Hello, I just wanted to ask you about the importance of the collections for climate change. You just went briefly into it at the end about how you can take things like DNA from the collections, and that actually tells you a lot about the environment that the species are living in at the time.
Yeah. One of my earliest favourite stories about how we could use them is there's a type of fly called a chironomid. It's a non-biting midge. And when the larvae molt, they leave behind their head capsules. So I spent some of my early years looking at the teeth of a baby fly, which is quite a specific role. But these baby flies, they are very, very specific to the environment they're in. So they need a critical temperature. Now, they vary with species what temperature they have, because some of them live in incredibly cold environments, some live in incredibly hot. But we have these slides, we have these cores, we have these collections of head capsules. So we can go back and look at what species was, what the date was, and we're now able to say, okay, there's all sorts of things happening and change. Now, a lot of that is done with the ice cores, but these ice cores, we have been collecting for hundreds of years, and we have other people's data, and they're sitting there. So the resource within the museum, we don't even know how much there is at the moment. What we're looking with the short-term change, with the flies, we're beginning to do so much more with that. One of the next thing we're going to do with the mosquitoes is that we're going to start, it's mapping it against modern changes with climate change. So we've people got out there, we've got them in Africa working on the modern anopheles, and then we've got our historic ones, and we can look at the influences of habitat change, climate change on that. So the world's your oyster, or the collection's your oyster, or your collection's a fly, whatever.
Hi. Sure. So I live in the Western Isles of Scotland, and I don't know, I suppose it is related to climate change in a way. The midge, you mentioned the midge. We got midges, and they bite. and we're not very fond of the midges. So I figured, since you're an expert, is
Okay.
there something you can tell me about the midge so that I can appreciate it better and maybe
Yeah.
tell people when we're getting bitten half to death what they're good for? Are they like
Okay.
pollinators or something?
No, I'm going to give you 3 things why these midges are brilliant. 1, these midges, these biting midges, it's the family of Ceratophragonidae. These are the ones that are your chocolate pollinators. So we got, now it's not her fault, it's a mother. This is why she's biting you. She's trying to do the best for her offspring. Okay, so it's not her fault she's doing that. She needs a blood meal for egg development. The rest of the time, she's a vegetarian. Okay, she's a pollinator. The males are always pollinators. You will never get bitten by a male. So they're really important, and especially in the Arctic environment, I think there's 4,000 species of insect in the Arctic environment. 2,000 of those are flies. So those biting midges, they're really important pollinators. And those biting midges have babies, lots of them, okay? And when it comes to ecosystem services, the bottom of the food web, little baby flies are really fat, juicy packets of loveliness. We will all be eating flies soon, whether you know it or not, because they are incredibly proteinaceous. Like the black soldier fly that we are using for farming, it's 40% protein, 30% fat. You know, they're really good. So you think about all that migratory wildfowl, waterfowl coming over, they need those little babies. So they're pollinators, they are part of the food web, everything about them is lovely. Plus, they've got some really good mating stories, but this is not the stage for that.
Hiya. So thank you for that interesting talk. But you touched a bit on how there's not a lot of research on insects, and I've seen that a fair bit throughout climate change research. Do you see improvement for cooperation between the different museums and academia? Are you building on top of one another's research, or is it pretty stagnant?
No, it's absolutely. And the thing about with the databasing project is that immediately we database something, it's out there. It's on the web. So it's not just, you know, we're doing it, we're keeping the information, the research is our research, it's anyone's research. So what is lovely now is that we're not forcing people to travel, say, from Brazil to the UK to mine our data. We're throwing it out there. And every museum is realizing the importance of this. And it's all going on the web, it's all open access, it's all free. And so I see this as a really, really important thing. We put up with the problems of looking after thousands and millions of flies, but the data is there for everyone to use it. And this is brilliant. I'm quite positive about this one.
Hello, thank you for the really interesting talk. Do you have any thoughts about the role of genetic modification in insects, whether it be that good or bad, and using extinct species and what we're learning about them and so on?
Yes. I'm mindful of our mistakes when it comes to eradication programs with mosquitoes. Now, it's obviously, when we went in before, we went with a complete blanket insecticide. That's really bad for biodiversity. But what was interesting, the first things that came back was what we were trying to destroy, the mosquitoes. And we are looking now at how quickly mosquitoes can evolve. And this is quite, you know, we would try and kill them one way, they will come back another way. Very tenacious little ladies, I have to say. But what we've also seen, when land use change is going on, so when we start encroaching into different habitats, what we didn't think were vectors before, the ones that are carrying malaria, are now becoming new vectors. So my worry is when we modify a creature and make sure it's not, that little malaria, that plasmodium, will still manipulate another species to do the same thing. So I think we really have to think as the whole ecosystem, put balance and checks in a different way. We have to fundamentally rethink how we live in the environment, because we are part of this. And I don't want people, obviously, to die of malaria. I'm not that nasty. But I think we've got to go about it in a much more holistic way of understanding the species, the ecology of the species, and things like that.
Hi, you spoke about insects as pollinators. Could you say a bit more about the relationship between industrial agriculture and insects? My guess is that it's not great for them, but I don't really know like what modern farming practices are like for the insect species. Thanks.
So there is definitely a lot of variety. The really good thing about flies, unlike, say, the bees, is that adult flies and baby flies, it's my technical term, they generally feed on different things. So when you've got these enormous agroecosystems, that you find often that you have a separation, so the adults won't get impacted by the insecticides in the same way. So that's good. There's a little bit of resilience there. However, we need these larval habitats. So we need hedgerows, and we need rivers, and we need all these sorts of things. So we need to do that. Because actually, it's not just the pollinating services of the insects that are important, it's their predatory aspect. So the hoverflies, a lot of them have what we call aphidophagous larvae. They eat aphids. I mean, they don't just eat aphids, they gorge themselves stupid. If you're in your garden and you see what looks like a moving piece of bird feces, because that's how attractive they are, that is the thing that's eating all your aphids. One larvae can consume 400 aphids before it becomes an adult. So when it comes to agroecosystems and crop services, these hoverflies are doing amazing things. Now, there is a resilience when we're seeing, with insects, when we're seeing a decline, there's 2 or 3 species of hoverfly that aren't declining, but because they're migrating from huge distances. But when we get into the more fragile zones, when we get into like the edges of Scotland and the really quite fragile ecosystems, which has more endemics, you're still going to have a massive problem with your agroecosystems. There's no way they can support themselves. They need hedgerows, they need soil, they need water, they need everything else. So we have to be very careful.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for those great questions. And don't go away too fast, as there's another conversation with science coming up in a few short minutes. But thanks, Erica. Thanks for being here.